You're pretty an amazing guy. I've how many years now?
Have we known each other? I don't know, 4, something like that?
Yeah, it feels a lot longer than
that.
I feel like a kindred spirit in a lot of ways. Very impressive on so many levels as an individual, not only your track record professionally. Actually, speaking of that, do you mind edifying the audience on who you are and some of the things that you've done?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that alone could be an hour.
Audience. I'm Joseph Bondy, and I am a criminal defense attorney, principally practicing in New York. I'm in private practice. I represent people who are generally in a lot of trouble. I've also developed a expertise in cannabis law, cannabis business law, as well as criminal law. And I sit on the board of a couple not-for-profit groups, the Cannabis Cultural Association, which is a 3,000-member 501c3 group situated, really centered in New York City, that is designed to obliterate the disparity of legal enforcement against communities of color and to ensure their equal participation in the nascent cannabis industry. I'm a member of NORML's National Legal Committee, life member, and I'm also on the board of directors of this another 501c3 called Veterans Ananda, which is a group in New York State, up in Syracuse area, that is dedicated to cultivating and processing hemp with veterans, growing the hemp, for the purpose of benefiting veterans groups. And I have had the real privilege of representing maybe 1,000 people during the past 23 years. Wow. From all walks of life and all stages of litigation. Earlier in the year, we sued Jeff Sessions in the federal cannabis lawsuit. I was a member of a much larger team, but it was a really kind of a milestone case that's still working its way through the appellate courts. And that's me.
Yeah. You forgot what about your podcast?
Oh, mine. I'm like, I forgot about it. I have In the Know 420. In the Know 420. Yeah. I'm in episode maybe 82 or 3 or something.
You're 82,
right?
Wow.
And we used to run it off talkradio.nyc. Now I do it live streaming on Facebook every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. In the Know 420. And what I do is I'm, like much as you are, the biographer for my special guests who are cannabis thought leaders, and I interview them and talk with them about, what has made them a great advocate or an activist or a grower or a business person, and kind of the advice that they may have. We end every show with the advice that they may have for people who are also trying to get involved in cannabis. And so that's given me a really wonderful opportunity to network with some of the greatest thought leaders in the industry and to offer them the benefit, just like you offered me, that nice thing about being on the show, right? and being put in a really kind of a good light. So I've really found that show to be a wonderful conduit for me to developing my network.
I remember the inaugural show. And Pat and I, we were there for the first one, and you tried telling us that was your first time, and we left there like, there's no way, because you were a natural.
That was in November of 2016, and we had Keith Stroup on, who is the founder, remains the executive director of the NORML Foundation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was excellent. I can't believe you've done 82 already. So for those who aren't familiar with this space, I mean, putting on one of these shows is a significant amount of work.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy. I mean, what I found was helpful to me is I started my show as kind of an advertisement for the law practice, mm-hmm. And of course that really didn't work, and at least not in the beginning, Now I've got a lot of people that call me for a number of reasons, not necessarily the show, in cannabis-related cases. But I started that show as a means to try to attract clientele. Mm-hmm. And what I found along the way is that it gave me an enormous opportunity to learn from people in a way that also helped me be a better trial lawyer. And so when you're talking to a person and you're interviewing them, it's kind of like the direct examination, you're getting the story out in a way that's interesting and not merely and what happened next, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're then shifting with your guest and kind of asking them some of the more controversial questions, it's like a cross-examination in some ways, a gentle cross-examination. And then when you're using your voice, you're also practicing being an orator. So I found that as an ad and then as a trial workout, since I like to be on trial, but I'm not on trial every week or every month even, I would do that show, and it worked out nicely in that respect. I then began to go to some of these cannabis events in New York, and people were like, "Oh, I heard your show," or "It's really like great. I love this show." Then I had really nice people from within the cannabis community begin to, want to be on the show, agree to be on the show, to react favorably to having been on the show. And I found that the development of this kind of organic from a little kernel, right, network was really, really, really powerful as well. Like a really strong web came from that. So that's kind of how I started it. I've now got a co-host who is one of the co-founders of the Cannabis Cultural Association, and Jacob Plowden, who came to me and asked if he could be, my co-host, and I was more than happy to have him on the show. He's much younger than I am, African-American guy, really, really talented, brilliant, and the two of us together talk to the guests, and that works out really, really well. And it's been a pleasure to also have another person on the show that's, doing well and enjoying it and thriving and bringing me an enormous amount of energy as we go.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a great show, by the way. Your show is, a lot of people reach out to me knowing the background that I had in cannabis and, inquire about whether it's business opportunities or people to speak with. And I always point them in the direction of your show. I feel like that's the great opportunity for them to learn who the experts are and really learn the topics inside and out.
That's great. You give me a microphone, I'll never stop.
Yeah. So. How?
Don't give a lawyer a microphone.
Talk to me about how, the relationships that you've built have transcended into your podcast.
Well, I mean, I was born and raised in New York. I was publicly educated in New York. I was relatively a social person. I can't say I was a complete extrovert. I think I'm a little more extroverted with a need for a little bit of back time, but
ambivert.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what ambivert.
Ambivert. Yeah,
all right, I'll run with it. So, I had a lot of friends growing up. I had a lot of friends that were in the time of Nancy Reagan and Just Say No, and cannabis was so stigmatized, and you get busted, you get in a lot of trouble. And of course, it was the beginning when I was in my late teens, early 20s, of course, of the mandatory minimum sentencing regime, and although cannabis had been decriminalized in New York since the 1960s, people were routinely being arrested and not merely ticketed, whereas today, not prosecuted, not ticketed. So it was a bigger deal. And I knew a lot of people involved with just smoking pot. Like the high school kids smoke pot, they drink beer. Drinking beer is not quite as good for you, right? Both unlawful at the time. And the relationships that I had in my youth caused me, growing up and going to high school, even in the Bronx High School of Science, to begin to understand that some people got treated a little differently than other people did. Oftentimes it was a matter of demographics, social class, more often a matter of racial background, and that, there really was such a thing as white privilege. And so I went to undergrad at Columbia. I began to and I was still a Manhattan liberal, but I began to, learn and absorb as many subject matters as I could. I had no idea or intention or belief I was going to be a lawyer in any respect, right? But that web of people who I had known when I was younger, who were, cannabis positives, shall we say, right? I think fermented in me when my mother confronted me and said, "What are you going to do? You got to go to graduate school." And I said, "Well, I'll be a mafia lawyer. You like that? I'll go be a mob lawyer." I think that reaction, and she said to me without skipping a beat, right? She didn't miss a beat. She said, "Well, then go to Brooklyn Law School because they graduated the best mafia lawyers, Joe, and I'll get you an application to Brooklyn Law School if you'll apply." And I said, okay, and I took the application. I applied. I got in. It was like July. I was fishing in New Hampshire, and I got this application by FedEx. I got it back to my mother. I got in for like the August class, and this was the most cosmic event of my life because the very first day of law school, I met my wife.
That's right.
The very first class, and fell in love with her the moment I saw her, but we couldn't quite get it together for about a year or so. So when I got to law school, I began to develop an interest in criminal law, I believe, because as a kid growing up in New York, as I said, I'd had these experiences with people engaged in, misdemeanor land, marginal criminal activities, some getting away with it, others maybe not so lucky. There wasn't really the formal stop and frisk type policy that was recently abolished and that came under such fire but certainly there was a enormous wellspring of iniquity that needed to be addressed. And I thought that being a defense lawyer would be a great way for me to try to make a difference and help out other people. So my first clients came from people that referred them to me and who knew me, you know, as a young person growing up. And I had the benefit, I was fortunate enough, I had a very stable family. My mother and father, you know, raised us, and we had, you know, a exceptionally loving and warm home, you know, modest nonetheless, but warm and together and close-knit. And there were people who were maybe, you know, living a couple miles away from you that had a very different reality, you know, and you intersect with them in school. So I was fortunate enough when I began to practice law, and I'd spent a couple of years at a smaller law firm before going out on my own, to have people begin to refer me, you know, not the biggest of cases, right? Like nominal cases, right? And I then grew that network into some of the largest cases that were coming down the pike, federal cases in the 1990s and, you know, in the new millennium.
Any cases that you're able to talk about that people might?
And all of it comes from kind of coalition building and network building, you know. In the very beginning, I worked for a small law firm that did a lot of work representing international narcotics traffickers. And I was the young lawyer that went to jail. I was like the stunt lawyer that had to write the things and go to jail and do all this, you know, young lawyer type stuff, the hard work, right? And in the course of doing that, I found a lot of people who were in really tough times in their lives, you know, imprisoned and away from families, and oftentimes facing lengthy mandatory minimum sentences for being a courier of drugs, you know, for some role in a conspiracy where they weren't the proprietor, they didn't own the stuff, they were making a nominal fee. And I began to, you know, in the course of feeling that pain, find a means for myself to bridge very, very well and draw things out of people in a way that was really, I thought, powerful. And it enabled me to be my clients' biographers to the sentencing judge or to the jury, and to get a positive outcome by using these, you know, these emotions that I had and harnessing them to the task of knowing people. And I thought that was really a remarkable thing. After I left that law firm, I began to practice on my own.
Can I interrupt for one second? How much of the connection do you think transcended into the outcomes? Meaning, how, you know, that bond that you had, the empathy in understanding your clients, how, you know, from taking it from understanding their position from you to the jury and judge and jury.
You see my cousin Vinny, right? Vinny really cares about his client, right? The other dude's just like a nitwit, right? Yeah. There's something about being passionately committed to a human being that a jury sees. It's something that you convey. It's like a believing in the human being that you're representing and being their advocate and being their voice when they can't really speak it, you know, and being able to stand up and defend a person against the state is a real, you know, compelling act of heart. And it's scary sometimes, and I've gone white from the experience, you know, but I think that having that mindset, that heart set, and it's an honest one, right, is one that has enabled me to win a number of outcomes that, you know, if I didn't care about the person, I probably wouldn't have won. People who care about their outcome frequently do better than people that are ambivalent.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'd cut you off. You talked about then, so you transitioned from...
So I then moved practice, right? And I began to have a lot more clients who were, you know, significant federal fraud clients, white collar clients, security clients, boiler room type people, end of the 90s, beginning of the new millennium. And it's so interesting because those securities, boiler room type clients began to expose me to the first clients I had who were allegedly tied to La Cosa Nostra and the alleged mafia, right? And that
What does that mean? This friend of ours, or look?
Oh, that's just, you're a friend of mine.
Friend of
It's a
mine.
friend of ours.
Yeah.
This is a friend of mine means he's not a made dude. And if it's
Yeah.
a friend of ours and you guys are made, then that's some other made guy. These are all purported rules of the purported mafia. But I then began to have a few more clients that were charged with those types of crimes. I tried the case for my client Peter Gotti, who was alleged to be the head of the Gambino crime family during a certain period of time, in which the government alleged he'd conspired to kill Sammy the Bull Gravano. And at the same time, because it was a racketeering trial, and that has multi-prongs to it, we were defending against the claim that he ran some kind of, or sat on a concrete commission that you have to kind of, pay if you want to build anything in New York. So I had that trial, we lost that trial, we lost that appeal. We did a very good job in that case, but ultimately couldn't, overcome the evidence. I have won the only entrapment acquittal I've ever heard of, where the entrapper, the person that manipulated and inveigled and cajoled my client to engage in criminal activity, was the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. And that was a pretty good one. I enjoyed winning that. There was something poetically just about that. And then I represented a Nigerian woman in an advance fee fraud case, and I got the only acquittal I've ever heard of in the United States of a defendant in a Nigerian advance fee fraud case. And the key to winning that case, of course, was subtly arguing to my jury that I'd picked of 11 women that her husband had this Svengali-like grip over her, and there was no way of knowing what she had ever done intentionally, right? Which is, of course, the linchpin of law is intent. So I went through that mafia period, then I went to this kind of period of all-purpose, really kind of, I represented the mafia cop Louis Eppolito, won the reversal of his trial conviction in the Eastern District of New York for racketeering and multiple murders. We then lost that case on appeal. The Second Circuit reversed it. The Supreme Court sustained his conviction. But along the way, I was doing more and more and more of these cases. I began to do a number of really kind of big-scale cannabis cases. And these are just the trials, like 95% of things are not proceeding to a trial. They're proceeding to a plea. And so along the way, I'm representing a lot of people, and again, pretty significant cases, and doing a lot of negotiation with the government, and, getting a lot of sentencing reductions for my clients under the federal sentencing guidelines, both when they were mandatory and today when they're merely advisory. Tried my last federal trial was a 7-ton marijuana case in the Southern District of New York, which we lost. However,
7 tons.
And this became the pivot, if you will, for federal criminal law and
What year are we talking?
2015.
Okay.
I tried that case. We lost. The client was facing maybe 15 years in jail, having lost the trial under these guidelines. I got him relief from the mandatory minimum under something called the safety valve provision of the minimum. The guidelines were still over 10 years, but there was no minimum. I then persuaded the sentencing judge to give him a variance from the guidelines downward, and he received a sentence of 15 months, having lost trial in a 7-ton marijuana case. And as a result of that, my friends in the Southern District, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, tell me they don't bring that many federal marijuana cases anymore, at least not marijuana alone, and indeed they don't. And so I did a really great job
you set the precedent
diminishing the whole client pool for me in the Southern District of cannabis cases. But that was something I thought was really, really, kind of monumental, or at least it healed and helped the landscape with respect to cannabis. So that began the transition. I have a pretty healthy docket of people in federal cannabis matters now, not in Manhattan. I've got a sentencing coming up in the Northern District in a few weeks, which is Albany, that kind of area. And I've then transitioned, as you might imagine, with this whole industry and me going to these events and talking about these things and knowing about cannabis from, the level of regulatory and statutory and federal criminal law and New York criminal law, all the way through the process of understanding the shifting sands, what's going on in different states, what licensing requirements there are in different states. I've tried very hard, whether it's to do the news on my weekly show, which, as you know, you've got to be prepared to do.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So you got to study that stuff. But I've found that by putting all that together And then going to networking events, I was in a position to take the things that I'd been enjoying and passionate about and learning about, and then to talk to other like-minded people about it, many of whom are looking for a lawyer they can trust.
That's amazing. So you're now, I mean, you're in your zone. You are in flow, as they would say.
I have a microphone on. I'm well lit. Dude, what could be better?
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it must be so much fun. I mean, you're pursuing your passion. You're helping people. This is something that you're really excited about. You're meeting great people. Let's talk about the cannabis community. Let's talk about some of the people that you've met. Let's first just talk about the community at whole. What would you say? How would you describe this movement?
Here's the thing. It's like we're almost a group of people that have something unique and separate and apart from the macro culture, although now we're becoming the macro culture, right? Where, as I said in the beginning of the show, for many years, the older people among us were not in a safe space, right? Cannabis was stigmatized. When there became this kind of movement or revolution, and there was first the medical movement, and people had the right to use cannabis for medical purposes, first palliative and end of life, and then more mainstream, insomnia, anxiety, etc. There began to be this diminution of the stigma, right? And then when you start to actually apprise people of these things, like alcohol kills a lot of people and so do cigarettes, and you don't have that with cannabis, this benign, mildly, beautifully psychoactive substance, or if you're into CBD, just an anti-inflammatory. But that when you start to look at the studies and make the arguments and say, but this is a safer alternative to those traditional sin substances that people use for fun in a non-medical recreational manner, and then you apply it to these medical uses like titrating people away from opioids or using it as a first line for chronic pain. Instead of giving people the opioids first, you try the weed, So there began to be an evolution politically and legislatively with respect to the way that people viewed cannabis. And you then began to see a lot of people who had previously been opposed to legalization, seeing the impact of medical cannabis upon a loved one, whether it was an epileptic child or someone who was wasting from chemotherapy or from AIDS. And you began to, because there's really, the proof is in the pudding, there's nothing more persuasive for somebody than watching a patient benefit through the use of cannabis if you're opposed to recreational use. And then when you talk about recreational use with people, the community today, right, is a community that has witnessed firsthand and has studied and knows the history of cannabis prohibition as a means to socially control and over-police certain communities of color in the inner city. Just like crack was used in the same type of way, and heroin's been used in the same type of way. And so today, when you are in a room of people who are in a safer space, and you've got kids that don't even know about this kind of unsafe space, right? They're just all like there, and they've got an invention, and they're all like completely unstigmatized out in the open. It's really amazing. They're doing blockchain with cannabis. They've got a passion to build a gigantic greenhouse. I was talking with someone earlier today. They want to grow 1,000 acres of hemp, and they're going to go do it, right? Like right out of the gate. And this past year, they had a slightly smaller project, but you go to an event and you see these people, and you talk to these people like me, elders who remember this kind of historical march, and you're in a place with people who are like-minded, who are passionate about this, who care about social justice, criminal justice reform, who know what the war on drugs has done to people, who are opposed to the war on drugs, are opposed to racial profiling, are opposed to stop and frisk, are opposed to mandatory minimum sentencing, are opposed to people being incarcerated without bail, and who believe that this new industry should be all-inclusive, all walks of life, all orientations, all backgrounds, and that everyone should be able to have a seat at the table. So now you're in a group of people who not only love this plant that you have an affinity for, and that's a heavy thing. If you've ever been like somewhere foreign, some odd place you've never been before, and you happen upon somebody who's got a little weed, that's like kind of an immediate bond, right? So now if you extrapolate that, we've got the love of the plant and everything that that has meant for us all individually, and then the love of people that's brought us together, and the belief that we can legalize it for reasons that involve fairness, and that involve ending a certain form of bigotry, and that involve giving people equal protection of the law, or being allowed to use their medicine for purposes of saving their life, or being able to travel onto federal land as a medical marijuana patient, or being able to pursue their passion through their employment, or getting a security clearance in the military, or being in the military, or getting cannabis as a veteran. We stand for all these things that are completely the right thing. And when you're with a group of people like that who are on the right side of history, it's really an amazingly powerful feeling.
That's amazing. So I'll tell you an interesting story, and I actually meant to call you to, just as anecdotally a couple of weeks ago at an event at a friend's 50th birthday party, and a guy comes up to me and we get to talking. He's very well to do. Short story is his daughter has epilepsy, and he is extremely anti, but he loved to drink. Short story is the only thing he could do to help with his daughter was through cannabis, but he was hesitant. He's like, I'm not just going to give my daughter something without myself taking it first. So not only did it help his daughter from the epilepsy, but he enjoyed it. So he quit drinking. He says the relationship with his wife is better. He's the healthiest he's ever been. His daughter is doing fantastic, and now he's a big contributor to the cause.
That's a really good story.
Yeah.
You know, what I've found is that drinking is a very, very tough thing for people to transition out of, right? It's like a bottomless pit that doesn't end.
Yeah.
And I think that the use of cannabis as treatment for alcoholism is a harder one than use of cannabis for treatment or titration away from some other form of controlled substance in a more relatable form, you know? But that's good to hear.
Yeah. Have you heard of Michael Pollock?
No.
Oh, he's more on hallucinogenics, but he's got an interesting book, and he's an interesting guy that you might want to look into. I'll send you.
Pollen.
Maybe it's pollen. It could be pollen.
Pollen. You're talking about the guy that wrote this book called like the Botany of Desire, aren't you? Michael Pollan, P-O-L-L.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so I guess you do know who he is.
The Botany of Desire, bro. And he just like wrote a book about these psychedelic experiences of his. Yeah, he's an exceptional author, right? And he has this premise in Botany of Desire, because for those of you that don't know me, I'm like a plant-obsessed guy, right? I collect orchids. I've got a USDA import permit for rare and endangered species plants, although I think I might have to renew it soon, right? But I've been like really collecting plants in my home in Manhattan, putting them under, of all things, LED lights, and some of the best, literally the best things for mass marketing, you know, cultivation, horticulture these days come from cannabis developments and cannabis innovation. But Michael Pollan wrote this book, The Botany of Desire, and left me with this fantastic thought, which is, we work for the plants. We like to think the plants work for us, but we work for the plants in a number of ways. We propagate them and allow them to spread. We eat them and then we spread them on our own, right? We take care of them and we help them with hybrids and mutations and clonal and tissue culture, and everything that's now being done with plants is something where the plants have us working for them. I think that the injection into that equation that's not maybe, you know, something that's kind of nuanced is the role of genetically modified organisms in, you know, this relationship, and whether that's a factor that really harms the plant in a way that's irretrievable. Michael Pollan.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So back to the community for a minute. I mean, I just know the people that I've met and some of the amazing people that I've met through your channel. I've been really impressed with, and I've noticed that there definitely is a community, there is a network. People genuinely want to help each other. What do you see people doing within that community that maybe you're not noticing that they do, that other communities don't necessarily share?
I think there's a lot of not-for-profit work now, and I think there's a lot of community work towards ensuring diversity and inclusion, right, in the industry. And I feel like cannabis legalization represents a clean slate to help a lot of people who've been historically set back, and to provide people an opportunity to own a business, have a significant role in a business, participate in something at the same level as anyone else, you know. And I think that the groups that are pushing that correctly forward are, you know, really remarkable people, like Cannabis Cultural Association. By the way, you met all the core of Cannabis Cultural Association when we had but 7 members, and they just invited me to be on their board. Do you know what our membership is now?
I think you just said 3,000 people.
Over 3,000 people.
I was at the original.
3,000 people. And we were the masters of ceremony for this year's Cannabis Parade and Rally in New York, which was fantastic.
Congratulations
thank
on
you.
that. Yeah.
But that group, we were out in Patterson a couple weekends ago. We were speaking at a Masonic lodge, right, to the community. Mayor was there, city council people were there, about opportunities in this nascent cannabis industry. And that was like, you know, inner city talk with people. I was on a panel talking about, you know, don't make yourself vulnerable, know your rights, stay safe, all that kind of stuff, right? I think that that's really kind of a cool thing that's being done at a grassroots level. Every week you see a combination of events like that, and events that bring speakers to a forum, like the Women Grow events, the Canna Gather events, the On the Revel events now. And those are occurring with regularity, and they're for profit. You know, you pay a ticket price, you go, you hang out, you have a lovely time with people who are in this community from all walks of life, literally. And, you know, as I said, passionate about a core thing that in your Venn diagram you can really understand.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed from some of the events that I've been to, and I go to a lot of different events in a lot of different industries, but in the cannabis specific space, it's amazing how approachable people are, and people are really there to meet other people and to benefit a cause that's higher than them, versus, you know, and like you said, a lot of it is nonprofit, versus some of these other industry events that I've been to, whether it's finance, whether it's technology, where people are sitting a little more on the sidelines. They're a lot more passive.
No, this is like you want to build your network. We go to these networking events, and you're in a room in these, at least in New York City, right, which is, you know, West Coast, people talk about the West Coast is so far advanced. I'm on the faculty of Amsterdam University. I do a law component for them, and I was talking to their dean, Asim Sapal, who of course has been a guest on my show as well, right?
Yep.
And he has informed me of this data point, which I found very interesting. After California, the second highest number of graduates of that whole program came from New York.
Of Amsterdam.
Yep. Unbelievable, New York. We've had a vibrant underground cannabis economy. The city of New York consumes, I don't know, 1 million pounds of pot a year, right? So, you know, there's a lot of people who know a lot about cannabis. There's a lot of money in New York, obviously. There's a financial hub. There's a lot of people that want to bring that money and become involved in cannabis, invest in cannabis, and go to that space. And it's one of the only places where in a 200-person event, you can find people who are growing, extracting, licensing, distributing for licensing people, financing things, investing in things, involved in private equity companies, involved in ad companies, involved in consulting firms or in the advocacy groups. And so during the course of any one night, right, you go to a networking party, and it's like if you get one good idea and you meet one good person, that's like pretty good, right? You go to these events, you get a few good ideas and you meet like 20 people, right? And I've got like a bin of business cards of awesome people that I have met simply by going and having a good time and talking about the thing that we all enjoy.
Yeah. Well, so you're at a point where you are clearly a thought leader, arguably one of the elite in this space. Before you got to that space, what did you have to do? Tell me about the relationships that you know, how did you strike up these relationships? What have you done to maintain them? Talk to me about that.
Oh, that's what you do when you're a kid, right? It's
not everybody does.
Well, for me, I applied the things that I was comfortable with in terms of my relating to people, right? And I found that was what worked. I mean, sometimes you have people who have to force themselves to, I guess, network, right? Or sometimes people who network so much, they got to titrate themselves back and shut up a little bit, you know? But I find that I like going to events and talking to people. I like going to good number of events, not all of those events, I'm not always out there doing it, but I'm not trying to pitch you really, My pitch is simple. My pitch is, I guess I do have a pitch, which is I'll help you any way I can. If there's anything I can do to help you, just let me know. Call me.
That's the key.
Right? And that's it. And I'm not asking you for money or anything, at least not yet, right? Not yet. But that's the truth of it, is like there are so many, as I said, younger people entering the space who deserve to be helped, who deserve to be able to succeed in cannabis, who deserve to really make the end of prohibition successful and come quickly. And if I can help them, if I can help any of them, if I can mentor young people to be better at what they're doing, whether it's cannabis or some other career or industry, then I think it's doing the right thing. You're paying something forward, since we all, at least the successful among us, frequently had mentors.
Yeah. Did you have a specific mentor?
I had a mentor named Bob Fogelnest, Robert Fogelnest, who's now retired, lives in Mexico. I met him when I was a student at the National Criminal Defense College, and he had just finished his tenure as the president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I asked him for a job down there, and he said to me, "Who the fuck are you? I don't need any fucking associates." That's what he said. And he said, "But can you pay me rent?" Right? He said, "I'm going to check you out with your teachers," because of course he was on the board of regents. He was one of the instructors. "And maybe I'll give you a spot in my office," right? A couple weeks passed. It was a couple-week program, and each day I was wondering if he'd spoken to them. At the very end of the program, he said, "I spoke to all your teachers," right? And they all said the same thing about you, which is that you're really arrogant. And I was like, "I'm not really arrogant." And he was like, "Just stop it. Stop it." They all say that you're the best student too. So I'm going to give you an opportunity. I'm going to have you meet the people in my office. We'll rent you out this space, and I'm going to charge you rent. I can't promise you overflow. If I give you overflow work, I'm going to try to exploit you. I'm going to pay you as little as I can and make you work as hard as I can, all right? And if things work out in the end, you'll be doing that to me. I had the great honor of learning to cross-examine from the greatest cross-examiner, and of learning how to be an ethical and powerful and aggressive lawyer from somebody who was amazing in my mind. We tried a number of cases together. Our last trial was in 2008, just before Bob retired. We were in Pennsylvania. We represented, I think, the biggest diverting physician of opioids in the state of Pennsylvania for a period of time. And although we lost the trial, we won the sentence. It was another one of those things. We got a relatively, modest sentence for the conduct, but I got to watch my modern-day Clarence Darrow in action, and he was amazing. We did end with Bob as my tenant, and me bringing him into a bunch of cases, and he was very prescient with his statements to me many years earlier. But yeah, that relationship was extremely important to me, not just in developing myself as a lawyer, but as you can imagine, being the bridge to other lawyers and credentializing me with other lawyers that didn't know me.
Yeah. Well, and then I've seen you pass it on. I mean, I don't know necessarily from a legal standpoint, but I've just seen a lot of the other people, whether it's through the cannabis cultural, I'm forgetting the name of it, but through them as well.
Marijuana will do that.
Yeah. I mean, I've just seen you, you're like a Pied Piper, where people, they flock to you and you pass on this advice and you share that with them.
But that's what you should do, right? That you do that too. I mean, I see people flock to you, right?
I pay them well.
And when they look up to you, right? Because you're so tall also. But that's what you do, right? Is you pay things forward, you honor the people that helped you, you put yourself in you want to do well, put yourself in the flow of life. You don't put yourself in the flow of life, you're like all choked and starved, right? You're in some little dripping, you have to put yourself in the flow, which involves giving to people as well. It involves listening, it involves hearing, it involves giving, it involves having a good heart. And then people treat you generally the same way. I mean, life ain't perfect, right? It's just like in Cold Blood, we're talking about it. You're gonna have a bad night and someone come on in and mess you up, right? There's all these people out there, you don't know who's who, or you get hit by a bus or lightning. But by and large, if you try to do the right thing, it comes back to you in an enormous way.
That's so well said. It's funny. I mean, these are all the things that I try to pass on to people in general. That, surround yourself with good people, do the right thing, and it pays itself in spades.
Yeah, keep telling the kids that.
Yeah, I really do.
Because you got this window when they're young, right? They get older, they don't want to hear your voice anymore,
Not at all. What is there anything in particular? I know that you've got to be somewhere today. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to talk about before I let you go?
Well, I guess it would be this advice about the network, right? We're talking about NetWorkWise, and I've tried to relate my remarks to the importance of the network. And I just said a couple things I think are, worthy of underscoring, which are be genuine, try to honestly help people, listen to people. It's tough to remember people's names. I've got some thought on this, like I read Dale Carnegie and everyone likes to hear their name and, so Adam, let's talk today, Adam. Thank you, Adam, for having me on NetWorkWise. But how the heck do you get there? I used to tease myself that the reason I'm not remembering other people's name is because I'm so busy trying to hear my own name, right? And so I think the notion of the network involves the team, and it involves you scrupulously being part of a team, right? Acting as part of a team, including people that you opt to have on your team in your mission and in your activities. So for example, I work with a number of young people, right? And I am working with them on a project of some sort. They become part of my network on that project. I have conference calls with other people on the project. I always include the people that I'm working with, I CC them on the emails. I don't not include them. I ask them to come to the meetings, right? Even if I know that much of what's going on is educational, for them, it's really important, and it's also about team building and consensus. And I also believe that having chose people correctly, when I'm an old guy, I'll be able to have someone throw me a bone kind of thing, Yeah. So
true.
But just being here is great. I must say, having been on your show has been great. Knowing you is great. It's the beginning of, I believe, a much longer relationship. And we're going to be networking soon with our friends that we're developing jointly at my daughter's bat mitzvah.
Oh, I can't wait. I mean, your 50th party was awesome. I mean, that party was so much fun. And I remember, because it was late, you guys did an impromptu, right?
We did it very late. I decided a week before my party, I should have a birthday party. I'm turning 50 years old, and it's not going to go away. So we did it, but that was fantastic.
It was a great party.
And there's another example of network, And my dad was really elated to meet people in the network.
Yeah.
He said,
your sister, your brother.
Friends.
Yeah. It was great. We were joking around because we got the invite a week before, and I'm like, man, we must be on the B or C list.
No, dude, it was only an A list. It was only an A list. But that's exactly what happened. Is I decided to have that, really at the precipice.
Yeah, and I mean the turnout, the people. I mean, I knew every time that we're out. I mean, everyone that I always walk away meeting some cast of characters, but that was fantastic. I mean, that just showed the culmination of the years and who you are, the people that you brought to the table within. I mean, it was literally a week, right? It wasn't even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I just, people from your you've stayed in touch with people throughout the years. And I think that is something that really speaks to the types of relationships that you've built. They transcend years. I mean, friends from high school, college, people that you've worked with, people you've represented, people that you're just involved. I mean, everybody. You want to talk about a cast of characters, a motley crew. I mean, that to me,
it's more fun than a pirate ship, dude. I gotta tell you, it's great. I must say, I am really, really blessed by having had so many people from so many different places be in my life with such a level of love, and principal among those relationships are really the clients I've had that I've tried to save from jail, or that I've had to watch go to jail painfully. So that's been a really beautiful thing that I've leaned into. And so I guess I'll end by saying, don't be afraid to face things that are a little uncomfortable, but beautiful, and kind of lean into them. They may help you in ways you never really imagined. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.